There are so many bros items in this game, so I'm not going to try to stretch out the intro. First things first, let's go over the rules. First thing, there's 16 bros items in this game. I'm not going to be taking the drill spin and the rhythm mushroom from giant battles into consideration. I don't want to talk about giant battles on this channel for a little bit, so I'm not going to be taking those into consideration. I might do something with them in a later video, but not right now. The second rule is that it's not just the damage that gets taken into consideration. We got the special effects, when you get it, and the BP cost as well. But other than that, don't forget to subscribe so the Shroob don't die, and let's get started. Number 16. It's weird putting an attack that you get so late into the game at number 16 as the worst bros item, but the Luigi Typhoon is just awful for so many reasons. But the main reason is that there's no good reason to use this. First off, it's horrible to control, and I think you know from me talking about giant battles with Giant Bowser that I do like controls being very useful and very practical. This Typhoon is so annoying to steer and turn, and obviously it's a tornado, it's going to be really hard to control, but you're the tornado. You should be able to control it pretty easily then, but no, it's just so difficult to control. But the second reason is that this is the most BP in the game, and it's not even worth using 16 for this attack. And the last reason is you get the Luigi wall right before you get the Luigi Typhoon. Why would you just instead use the Luigi wall? Why don't you just use the Luigi wall? It costs less, and you actually get to control where it goes. The Luigi Typhoon, you just have to hope and pray. The only time I actually used this was trying to get the expert challenge of using the Luigi Typhoon. And then I stopped using it, because it's useless and very hard to control. Number 15. This attack originally was going to be number 16, but the Luigi stack is somewhat necessary to use for a little bit, unlike the Luigi Typhoon, which is why it's number 15, but it doesn't mean that the Luigi stack doesn't suck. Well, first things first, it's really hard to pull off. This is the attack that I am the absolute worst at. I could still get some excellence with it, but I'm still not great at it, and that's a huge problem, especially because you need to get as many Luigis in the stack as possible. Unlike the Luigi Typhoon, where you don't have to get it perfectly pulled at the beginning. But the main thing about the Luigi stack that saves it for me personally is because you do need it to target one single enemy. Because most of the time, stuff like Luigi Wall, Luigi Flame, Luigi Typhoon, and the Luigi Ball is all used to target multiple enemies. But the Luigi stack, and especially the Luigi Hammer, you use to target one enemy. And since you don't get the Luigi Hammer until you go to Mount Pajama, which again isn't a huge range, it's definitely a big enough range to put it at number 15. So I still don't like using it. I would way rather use the Luigi Hammer, but it's not the worst thing in the world to use this thing. Number 14. So the Drop Chopper is, well, the Luigi stack's equivalent, except it's a little bit better for two reasons, and they were pretty close, but to be honest, I suck at both, and they both get replaced. But the thing about the Drop Chopper is, there's one boss that the Drop Chopper is almost a necessity for, and for the Luigi stack, there really isn't a boss that you think, oh, I need the Luigi stack. You could say maybe Big Massive, but you could also use the Luigi Ball if you really didn't want to use the Luigi stack. So I'd say that doesn't really count. But the other reason is that the Drop Chopper gets replaced way later into the game where you get the Star Rocket, while the Luigi stack gets almost instantly replaced once you get the Luigi Hammer. So I'd say that the Drop Chopper's better, but honestly, I don't like either of these. Number 13. Well, this is weird that I'm not combining these two, but the 3D green shell is a bit worse than the 3D red shell. And it's not because the attack is worse, even though since it is Luigi that owns it, it does less damage than the red shell, but that's not why it's lower. The main reason it's lower is because you have more priority on the red shell than you do the green shell. And what do I mean by this? It means that you get the fire flower right when you go into Dozing Sands. Well, not right when you go into it, but the next area you go into is Dozing Sands, and then you get the fire flower. You don't have another attack for Mario yet. So when you have to fight Corkscrew, you're basically relying on the red shell for Mario. But for Luigi, you can use the fire flower if you want to, unless you're weird and you want to just use the green shell instead, but hey, you do you. The thing about it is, it gets replaced way easier than the 3D red shell does. And once you get the bye-bye cannon from Mario, obviously it's gonna get replaced. I think you guys already know this, but it gets replaced later in the game than the green shell does. Number 12. You guys hear the exact same music, and, well, you obviously now know number 12 is the red shell. And honestly, I said exactly what I needed to say in the green shell segment. It gets replaced later in the game, and it does more damage. As well as, it's not as lazy with the attack pieces. Boss Brickle basically just gives you the green shell, which obviously is pretty convenient, but at least you have to actually find this one. Unlike, again, they just give it to you, which in a way is kind of lazy. So I'd say that this one's more unique. It's not technically a copy, it does more damage, it doesn't get replaced as early in the game, so I definitely say that it's better than the green shell. Number 11. This next attack is deceptively good, because the Luiginary Flame, don't get me wrong, it's actually pretty good spreading the fire to every single enemy. Or at least you think. The thing about it is that the Luiginary Flame doesn't actually hit every single enemy, so it's very confusing seeing that some of the enemies didn't get hit, and this really does apply to fighting the Elite Trio, because you think that you're damaging every single one, but, I don't know, one of the enemies just wasn't getting hit at all from it, which is just annoying because you don't have any control of where it's gonna hit. So if it's constantly only hitting one enemy, and you don't want it to continue doing it, well, there's no way to move it, it's just luck. So part of that is definitely annoying, and that's why stuff like the Luiginary Wall, and even the Luiginary Ball, has more control. So that's why it's only number 11. It's good for the Elite Trio, but it's not perfect. Number 10. The Jetboard Bash is such a unique attack, and this is not one of the last unique attacks that we're going to cover. Well, first off, this attack is super satisfying to pull off, because once you get an excellent, you swing your hammer like crazy, and then you go into slow-mo. It's so satisfying to watch, but other than that, this attack has so many problems. First things first, it doesn't attack flying enemies, which isn't as bad as you think, but you get this attack when you're in Somnom Woods, where the boss there is a flying enemy, and you actually have to do attacks to knock him down, which is a problem. But the second thing is, why would you use this attack over stuff like the Bomb Derby, and especially the Z-Egg? I could somewhat see the Bomb Derby because it does more damage, but the Z-Egg, there's no point of using it over the Z-Egg. And the last problem with it is that it's not easy at all to pull off consistent excellence. It's pretty easy to get consistent grades, but excellence are not super easy to pull off, unlike with stuff where I've mastered stuff like the Z-Egg and the Bomb Derby. So there's no reason I would actually use the Jetboard Bash. Number 9. The Luiginary Ball doesn't really have a boss that it really stands out for, but it just is this high because it's useful for so long throughout the game. And for this entry, we're going to be comparing it to the Luiginary Flame, because it's actually pretty similar, even though you get it way different times in the game. Because obviously Luiginary Ball you get early game, and the Luiginary Flame you get around mid-game. So the thing about the Luiginary Ball is that you have more control over which enemies you actually hit than with the Luiginary Flame, which is basically random which ones they actually hit. And the thing about it is that I think both attacks are actually really easy to pull off, which I didn't actually mention in the Illusionary Flame segment. I actually think that the Illusionary Flame is one of the easiest attacks to pull off, but both of them are easy, so it doesn't really matter to me. But the thing is that both of them will get replaced by the Illusionary Wall, which is why both of them are pretty low, and especially why the Illusionary Ball is only number 9. But the Illusionary Ball is actually somewhat useful for so long in the game that it absolutely deserves to be number 9. Number 8. So this entry is weird because the Fire Flower is so radically different from all of Luigi's attacks, and it was so weird to rank because I consider the Fire Flower kind of like the Bomb Derby, and the Bomb Derby doesn't get replaced, and neither does the Fire Flower. And you could say that you would just rather use better attacks, but think about it like this. The Fire Flower spreads out damage. It's the only way to do fire damage. No other attack has that. And yes, you could say, at least for doing damage to multiple enemies, the Sling Sniper technically can, but it's really hard to line up, and the Star Rocket can if you defeat one of the enemies. Other than that, though, the Fire Flower is the only one that actually spreads out damage. So I guess it has that use, and obviously the burn effect is kind of nice, but I'm not going to waste turns using the Fire Flower over stuff like the Sling Sniper and the Star Rocket. And it doesn't even have that many actual bosses that has a good effect of using it. The only one that you could really consider is Torch Screw, but in reality you only have 2 items to choose from. The 3D green shell or the Fire Flower. And at that point, you're obviously going to pick a Fire Flower. That's just a given. Why would you choose the green shell over a Fire Flower? But, I mean, it's not horrible, it's not hard. So that's why I placed it at number 8. It doesn't get replaced either, which is obviously why it's this high. Number 7. The Bye Bye Cannon is only useful for a couple of battles. But the 2 battles that it's useful for are weird. So one of them is Momoshka. Obviously, you could tell because of the crit point that he has on his head, which no other attack for Mario does that. And, well, that carries over for the rest of the game because the other battle that's actually really useful for is the final boss in the game, Dreamy Bowser, which is really weird to say because it's such an early attack that you get. And the reason why it's useful is because no other attack actually jumps on an enemy, which is so weird. But because of that, it has to be this high. It has to be at number 7. And it's not even a bad attack either. It's actually pretty easy to pull off. It also does a decent amount of damage. It doesn't have like a special effect that it does, but it's still useful nonetheless. Number 6. Take everything I said about the Fire Flower and put it into the Bomb Derby segment because they are so similar. The only difference is the Bomb Derby does more damage, but the Fire Flower has a burn effect. I would rather take more damage when you're spreading out the damage towards enemies than having a burn effect. So that's why it's higher, and it's really easy to pull off. You have to master it though, so that's kind of annoying. But if you do that, it's going to be a very good attack and a very useful one at that. Number 5. Here's the thing about this top 5. These 5 attacks are all really good, and it doesn't mean that I use all of them. It just means that I do acknowledge that every single one of these are extremely good and extremely powerful. But number 5 is the Sling Sniper. And out of these 5, I don't use the Sling Sniper. And the reason why it's this high though, even though I don't use it, well, first off, I'm not that good at it. But the reason why it's still this high is because if you get consistent critical hits, which means that you hit the star every single time, then that is the most amount of damage you can do with Luigi. If you don't get consistent criticals, then you might as well use the Star Rocket, which is why it's only at number 5. It is a fast attack and it's easy to pull off for most, but it's not for me, and that's the only reason it's number 5. Number 4. Number 4 is the illusionary wall. It's the controls. I love how easy it is to control Luigi going to each enemy. And you could say that the ricochets lose control. I disagree completely, because you can really easily direct where Luigi is going to go instead. So it doesn't matter to me. Also, this attack is easily the best one to take out hordes in the dream world. Now, I'm so excited about talking about this attack, but why is it the lowest? The main reason it's the lowest is because the top 3 don't get replaced by anything. Where the illusionary wall, even though it just won't get replaced, it definitely can be switched out for stuff like the illusionary typhoon or the illusionary flame if you really wanted to. So that's the reason it's only number 4. The top 3 don't get replaced by anything. They're the best of the best. And that's why. That's why this is only number 4. Number 3. The top 3, my favorite attacks in Dream Team, but honestly, we're just not going for nitpicks. Number 3 is the Star Rocket. And the reason why it's only number 3 is because tilt controls. Why did it have to be integrated into the Star Rocket? It didn't need them. I think they work well, don't get me wrong, I actually like them, but they didn't need to be there. That's the only reason it's number 3. I like that it's having a very good use in the final boss, where it actually does critical damage, but other than that, it has to be lower than the top 2. Number 2. The Z-Egg is awesome. This is the only optional bros attack in the game, and you have to save every single pillow in the game, but man, it was worth it. The Z-Egg is easily the best real-world attack, and not only does it do a ton of damage, and it's really fun to pull off, it is so satisfying seeing that ball of light just explode on the enemy. And it does so much damage, an incredible amount of damage. It does way more than any other bros attack in the game. Easily number 2. But the only reason it's not number 1 is because there's a skill gap. There is 100% a skill gap. You need to practice to get good at the Z-Egg. If you don't know what you're doing, you're gonna be awful at it. And I remember just being horrible the first few times I did the Z-Egg. Now, yes, it only takes maybe like 5 to 10 tries to actually master it, but again, we're going from nitpicks. The top 3 were so close, but the nitpicks were the reason that it's still here. Number 1. The illusionary hammer is number 1. And it seems so random just to put a illusionary attack that you get in mid-game that is so random at number 1. But the reason why is because this attack is unreplaceable. And the reason why is because this is the only attack, not counting the illusionary stack because I suck at it, this is the only attack that focuses one enemy. And this is so useful for battles like in Tasma X, where you only really have to attack in Tasma, but using stuff that like the illusionary wall just hits the Entasmunchies for no reason. So it's perfect. It doesn't have anything that replaces it. And also, it's probably the easiest attack to pull off in the game. So already, we got something that deserves to be number 1, and we just might as well pile onto that. There's nothing else that really makes it better, but the other thing is that I couldn't even find a nitpick for this thing. There was 0 nitpicks for me, because it fulfills the purpose that this attack is supposed to fill perfectly, and that's why it's number 1. Thank you guys for watching this video. My next video will, honestly, I don't really know. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Shroob Don't Die, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.